In January 1963, a dinner party was thrown at the home of the first secretary at the British Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon. Among those invited was Kim Philby, an ex-British intelligence agent. Instead of attending the party, Philby vanished from Beirut. Along with his coat and his drink, he left behind 30 years of British intelligence secrets. When MI6 searched his apartment, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. Detailed files on every major Western intelligence operation since the Second World War. Philby had been tasked with catching Soviet spies while secretly working for the KGB all along. And he wasn't alone. There were 5 of them, all British, all trusted, all part of the same elite spy ring. Their story begins in the ivy-covered lecture halls of Cambridge University during the 1930s. The world outside was turning hard and violent. Fascism in Germany, civil war in Spain, and a creeping sense that liberal democracy was too weak to stand its ground. Among young students in Britain's most prestigious institutions, a dangerous idea took hold: that capitalism had failed and communism might be the answer. Among these young minds were 5 men who would go on to change the face of modern espionage. There was Kim Philby, suave, calculated, and always 2 steps ahead of everyone in the room. Donald Maclean, intelligent and serious with a diplomat's polish and a revolutionary's resolve. Guy Burgess, chaotic, reckless, and dangerously well-connected. Anthony Blunt, cold, brilliant, and protected by royal proximity. And John Cairncross, the quiet one, underestimated but deeply damaging. They were recruited young, still students, by Soviet agents posing as journalists, academics, or sympathizers. The logic was simple: find the best and brightest before they entered government service, mold their ideology, earn their loyalty, and then wait for them to rise. And rise they did. After covering the Spanish Civil War as a journalist, Kim Philby joined MI6 in 1940. By 1944, he was head of Section 9, Soviet counterintelligence. The man hunting Soviet spies was a Soviet spy himself, with full oversight of every operation targeting the USSR. Every plan, every potential defector, every mission into Eastern Europe crossed his desk and went straight to Moscow. His first major betrayal involved Konstantin Volkov, a Soviet official in Turkey who approached the British offering to defect. Volkov claimed he could expose major Soviet agents inside British intelligence, including one in MI6. That agent was Philby. When Volkov's proposal reached London, Philby received the request as part of standard procedure. He stalled it deliberately and tipped off his handlers. Within days, Soviet agents reached Volkov in Turkey. He was bundled away, never to be seen again. Philby's access extended to American operations. He leaked US plans for inserting anti-communist forces into Albania, ambitious missions that were aimed at destabilizing Soviet control, but Moscow knew they were coming. While Philby bled intelligence from MI6, Guy Burgess and Donald Maclean worked Britain's diplomatic channels. Burgess bounced between departments but always stayed close to power. Posted to Washington as a diplomat, he collected sensitive material from US-UK defense meetings. Despite being notoriously drunk and confrontational, his class connections protected him. Nobody ever took the idea of him being a Soviet agent seriously. Maclean's position was even more crucial. Working at the British Embassy in Washington during the early Cold War, he had direct access to atomic energy communications between Britain and the US under the Quebec Agreement. Anthony Blunt operated from an entirely different angle. As an MI5 officer investigating foreign subversion, he had access to files on suspected Soviet agents in Britain. Blunt did his best to protect them. When surveillance was planned, he warned Moscow. Soviet assets routinely left Britain just before capture. His cover as an academic and royal advisor, eventually becoming surveyor of the king's paintings, gave him access to the Buckingham Palace and elite circles where secrets flowed freely. John Cairncross had perhaps the most strategically valuable position at Bletchley Park, Britain's code-breaking facility. He passed hundreds of decrypted German communications to the Soviets through the Ultra program. Some historians believe this intelligence helped Soviet planning ahead of the Battle of Kursk. After the war, Cairncross moved into the economic policy with access to NATO negotiations and British budget discussions. He fed Moscow not just with military secrets, but financial intelligence on Western reconstruction plans as well. For years, no one suspected a thing. How could they? They were Cambridge men, British to the bone, trusted with the nation's deepest secrets. But in 1943, the US Army quietly launched the Winona Project to decode Soviet intelligence messages. The Soviets had made a fatal mistake, reusing encryption keys that were supposed to be used only once. By 1946, cryptanalyst Meredith Gardner had begun to make breakthroughs in decrypting these communications. Among the deciphered messages was one referencing an agent codenamed Homer, who had access to sensitive information from the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. The decrypted messages detailed Homer's activities and provided clues about his identity. By analyzing the details, counterintelligence agencies focused their attention on Donald Maclean, a senior diplomat in the British Foreign Office. The net was closing, but Maclean had no idea. King Philby, who was in Washington at the time, learned of the investigation. Staying silent meant watching his fellow spy get arrested. Recognizing the urgency, Philby arranged for Guy Burgess, another member of the spy ring, to return to London under the pretense of disciplinary issues. Burgess's real mission was to warn Maclean. On May 25, 1951, Burgess and Maclean disappeared. They boarded a ship to France and eventually reached Moscow. Two insiders had vanished, confirming fears of deep Soviet infiltration. Philby came under immediate suspicion due to his close ties with Burgess and Maclean. MI5 interrogated him, but he denied involvement. Without concrete evidence, they couldn't detain him. Philby resigned from MI6 in 1951 but continued to assert his innocence. In 1955, Philby held a press conference to clear his name. The media bought it. The government issued a statement declaring there was no evidence against him. Philby was in the clear, at least publicly. Anthony Blunt continued his work within the royal household, but Blunt too had had connections with Burgess and Maclean, and his past affiliations raised questions, but again no hard evidence. In 1963, an American named Michael Straight told the FBI that Blunt had once tried to recruit him into Soviet spying. A year later, MI5 officer Arthur Martin questioned Blunt. At first he denied everything, but once he was offered immunity he confessed. Blunt retained his position and title, and no one outside the intelligence circles knew until 1979, when Margaret Thatcher exposed him in the Parliament. He was stripped of his knighthood but never faced any charges. Philby, meanwhile, had taken a job as a journalist in Beirut. In 1963, with new evidence emerging and pressure mounting, MI6 sent an officer to confront him. Philby admitted to some of his activities but denied being the third man who had tipped off Burgess and Maclean. Shortly after the meeting, Philby disappeared. He resurfaced in Moscow, confirming his role as a Soviet agent. John Cairncross faced his reckoning through a different path entirely. Following the Burgess-Maclean defection, British intelligence began systematically reviewing anyone who had worked with the missing men. Cairncross, who had worked in various government departments, including the Foreign Office and Bletchley Park, came under suspicion. MI5's Jim Scarden interrogated him in 1952, but Cairncross denied being a spy, claiming he had only passed information to Burgess as a friend. In 1965, MI5 officer Arthur Martin confronted Cairncross with new evidence, including information from American sources. Faced with this, Cairncross confessed to having passed information to the Soviets during World War II. In exchange for his cooperation, he was granted immunity from prosecution. The confession was kept confidential, and Cairncross continued his life abroad, working as a translator and writer. Cairncross's role as the fifth man in the Cambridge spy ring remained largely unknown to the public until 1990, when KGB defector Oleg Gordievsky confirmed his identity. The Cambridge Five weren't caught red-handed, they were caught too late, and by then the damage was already done. The Cambridge Five not only shaped the Cold War, but they left an indelible mark on how espionage is understood and executed to this day.